we are recording on November the 5th, of course.
Yes, it sounds like the Somme outside.
It does, fittingly enough. Yes, it does. So, by the way, guys, if you do happen to hear like bangs and patterings and whatnot, it's lots of fireworks going on at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Apologies for that.
Yeah, I don't live in Manchester anymore, so it is just fireworks.
Just fireworks, yeah.
I did used to have a lodger who was ex-army, and so bonfire night was like a really awful time. It was just kind of like he would just like shut the bedroom door, put his headphones on, and play music very loudly all the way through. Because
quite wise.
Yeah.
Nothing else significant going on today, of course, in world events. Nothing significant whatsoever.
No, not at all. Not at all.
No.
Nothing that would make us nostalgic for the days of Guy Fawkes at all.
It's interestingly tense, isn't it? It's
at the moment I am just going to it was a lot everything got easier after 2019 because I've just given up hope pretty much. I keep hoping it seems starting to recover it, but I'm generally assuming if you just assume that everything is fucked and going to get more fucked, then anything else comes as a pleasant surprise, really.
Politically speaking, yeah, there's something to be said for political nihilism at this point in history, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how as an unrepentant Corbynista, I'm not sure how that man manages to actually retain any form of optimism in the face of everything thrown at him, and how he was able to put up with so many disgusting personal attacks and smears without
resilience. I mean, the resilience of the guy. I mean, I know for a fact that I would not be able to withstand even a fraction of the filth and the lies and the slanders that were aimed at him.
If I typed on Facebook what I would like to do with the likes of Margaret Hodge and John Mann and Ian Austin and John Sexpest Woodcock and all the rest of those vile lying bastards, then the police would be knocking on my door. You can't just go typing on Facebook that you want to hammer bayonets through people's eyes, dude.
This podcast, though, you can say what you like, so have at it.
Fix it in post if it gets too.
Oh no, that's staying in. That's staying in. No.
It reminds me years and years ago.
I accord,
I read a piece by a dude called Mark Piggott years ago, and I think he was like some kind of anarchist. He used to be with class war, but he was writing about the history of rioting, and he said the opening line was, "Let's be honest, rioting can be fun." Then in brackets, "Oh shit, legal department."
Right. Yes, but it is. I mean, it is interesting though. I mean, especially given some of the subjects we're going to be discussing this evening. One of the things that does tend to happen is, on sort of in our political sphere, in our political spectrum, there does seem to be this lack of willingness to engage in some of the more strident or some of the more some of the things that our forebears would have done. So I look at these things through the lens of queer rights a lot of the time.
Of course.
And I look at what my forebears were doing when they were, and this historically is very recently. It's like yesterday. Literally yesterday.
This isn't actually occurred to me because it was something I was discussing with a friend of mine, because there was something about about how Nutella, which is owned by Nestle, it's got a lot of links with companies in Israel that are profiting from the genocide and everything, and it was basically we need to boycott Nutella, and she was like, "Gee," and it was this kind of thing. Well, for a start, so many think nearly anything you name is going to be turn out to be owned by some corporation that does something absolutely heinous you don't want to be part of. So it's very, very difficult. So in terms of boycotting, it's very difficult to do, especially if you're trying to function. But of course, something that occurred to me on the heels of that and something that I think, and maybe it's a kind of a symptom of the kind of atomization that's happened post Thatcher, of everyone being breaking away from politics of solidarity and turning to very personal stuff, just you and your family kind of thing.
The sort of cult of the individual,
because is this idea is this kind of like activism is fine if you don't, as long as it doesn't as long as you don't actually as long as it doesn't actually require you to inconvenience yourself.
Right, or
You know,
other people a lot of the time. I mean, that's the weird thing, right? There's a strange passivity that's descended that seems to derive from certain levels of comfort.
yeah,
Protest is
yeah,
fine as long as it's polite. And it's like, no, you're particularly, if you're a woman, if you happen to be of an ethnic diversity or a religious diversity, if you're like me, if you're queer, it's a case of, well, our forebears were not polite. None of them
no,
were.
and you don't get
You
anywhere.
know,
Power concedes nothing without a demand, as
no.
Frederick Douglass said. I mean, I was saying this, sort of like the suffragettes chained themselves to railings and went on hunger strikes, and even burnt
Yeah,
buildings down.
they
The
burnt
civil
buildings
rights
down.
movement got the shit
They
kicked out
kid,
of them, sometimes murdered. And
yeah,
the same with people who campaigned for gay rights. People had to go to prison. People got beaten up. People got killed.
mhm.
You know, there
And
was there
this
was
was so recent. That's what gets me about it. Historically speaking, I mean, I have a friend, and she used to own a gay bar in London in the 1980s. So she was right in the midst of it, right in the midst of it. And the stories she tells of the police just coming in, just arbitrarily turning up and just harassing people, being violent, being aggressive. And of course, what had to happen in order to stop that was solidarity. And not just sort of like talking about it, physically getting in the way,
yeah,
risking violence against yourself,
yeah.
that had to happen.
It's like a strike. A strike causes injury. I remember somebody said, "Oh yeah, strikes. Oh yeah, that's just going to sort of cause problems to ordinary people." Going to, it's like, oh fuck off. The whole
Yeah,
point of a strike is, it causes disruption. It causes
yeah,
inconvenience. It's not easy for the strikers often lose money, potentially lose
right.
jobs. I think of course now we are. I mean, because we're all homeowners, we're all
Mhm.
kind of caught up in economically, maybe in a way that we weren't 20 years ago, so that
Right.
a lot of us are in that very precarious thing where we're kind of where we're struggling month to month, and
Mhm.
again with the downturn in unionism and unionization and so forth, everyone is feeling very much on their own and atomized. So without that kind of solidarity, it's very hard to act. But I think as well, I mean, I often think of how environmentalists sort of would promote things. It's the planets in this, this big build-up of the planets in this terrible state. Well, what can we do? Well, recycle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a bit fucking more to it than that. There's
Yes,
got to be a fucking bit more
absolutely.
to it than that. So yeah, it means people are going to have to, if you want to have change, you have to find ways to put pressure on
Yeah.
people in authority. You won't. There was a wonderful. I don't know if you know any New Model Army stuff, but there is a song on one of their second album called "My Country,"
Mhm.
and it's there was that whole thing about how left wingers are always you're always being accused of being unpatriotic, or you hate your country, or blah blah blah. But he sort of what the song is sort of like, yes, I will fight for my country. I'll fight for the history of people who've stood up for freedom, for their rights,
Yep.
for but there is a line: no rights were ever given by the grace of God. No rights were ever
No,
given by some United Nations clause. No rights were ever given by some nice guy at the top. Our
no,
rights, were bought by the blood and sweat of our fathers and our forefathers before.
exactly that. Exactly
That's
that. And
you know,
asking politely, never going to work. Engaging in debate and discussion is never going to work. We know this. We
yeah,
know that this is the lesson of history. We know this. There has to be some kind, like you said, there has to be pressure. There has to
yeah.
be something to lose here. That's the point. We have to make it so that they have something to lose by denying us. And that's the way it's always been.
And it's very telling, I think, that there are moves in a lot of countries. I think Germany is trying to pass a law in that vein to criminalize
Mhm.
BDS, to criminalize actual boycott, divestment sanctions by people against Israel.
Mhm.
So I mean, this is, I mean, we are talking here about non-violent action, but we are
Right.
talking about something concrete and direct that can actually apply pressure, and there are now moves to criminalize that as a form of anti-Semitism.
Right. Right.
And the word anti-Semitism is in danger of losing all meaning
All
now,
meaning, yeah.
because
The
it's
way
simply
it's been weaponized, right? The way it's been weaponized just to basically silence anyone who criticizes Israel.
yeah.
That's the bottom line.
If I have to look at one more idiot on Facebook describing people who are protesting against a genocide as marching in support of Hamas or
Right, right.
Hezbollah, I'm not quite sure what will happen. I think
Well, let's be honest. They're insincere, aren't they? They are not engaging in good faith in that
you have
regard.
to say
The
that you either
bottom
have
line
to be
is this.
stupid or you have to be or you're
It's
maliciously
Oh,
lying.
you're a malicious liar. Yeah. The bottom line is genocide bad. It's either
Yes,
bad or it's not, right?
and you
It,
would
it
think
is
that would
that
not be.
morally simple.
You wouldn't think that would be a difficult thing, but I think a lot of people certainly would. I mean, because this has been happening for an awful long time. As far as I mean, I've
Yes.
had my eye on. I've been aware of issues with regard to Israel and Palestine. I've been aware of how of how accusations of anti-Semitism have always been
Mm.
weaponized in a very dishonest and intentional way, playing
Mhm.
on liberal Western guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of course, the worst thing you could possibly, because there would be an accusation of racism. If you're someone like Mel Gibson, he's going to
Yeah.
shrug
Right.
that off. He isn't going to give a shit. If
Right.
it's
Right.
somebody who genuinely who genuinely opposes racism and really, really wants to
Mm.
do everything they can, anything within their limited power to prevent it, to be accused of it is an
It's
extremely, it's hurtful,
it's
but
wounding. Yeah.
it throws you back because again, if you're not
Mhm.
from a marginalized group, you're then, am I, could I be
Am
wrong?
I exactly? It does lead you down that path, doesn't it? It makes you automatically consider: am I in some way being? Is my perspective distorted in some way?
Yeah.
And it's
And,
a legitimate question to ask because, of course, we do exist in anti-Semitic cultures. We do. Our history is anti-Semitic.
and you
Anti-Semitism is actually baked into our discourses, and that's something we have to acknowledge. But
and you
the
see,
way it
yeah,
has been weaponized to
and you do
silence criticism of Israel.
and you do see it in some elements of Palestinian solidarity campaigns. You do
Yeah,
see
yeah.
rhetoric that there is that rhetoric that kind of is on the line of just very fucking angry at Israel, quite
Mhm.
understandably so, and then there is that kind of that's a little intemperate. That's going a bit too, and then you get this stuff. Then you get this stuff shading into, hang on, that is outright conflating
Yeah,
Israel and Jews,
and Jewish
which is
people,
not
yeah,
on.
it's not on. No, it's not. Absolutely not. And of course, you look. It's so easy to make that distinction too. I mean,
Yeah.
what about the Jewish scholars who are themselves critical of Israel? Are they anti-Semitic?
Yes,
No.
this is. I mean, well, I'll come back to that in a second. But there's, I mean, one of the most vile terms that gets hurled around a lot is capo, which is
Mhm.
you with a K, not talking about the thing you put on a guitar here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
for anyone unaware, a capo was a term in the concentration camps for
yeah.
Jews who basically worked for that. I'm not sure if it was a case that they were actively collaborating in terms of they hated their fellow Jews, or it was more like, it was it was one way to survive, to live longer by
Mhm.
basically doing stuff like putting the corpses in the ovens and
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing. But it's a really hot. It's one of the worst insults you can throw at a Jew, and it's regularly thrown at any Jew who is critical. So there's this weaponization of identity. It's
Yeah.
you're an anti-Semite because I'm a Jew and I say you're an anti-Semite, but at the same time, this Jew says you're not an anti-Semite. This Jew, they're not a
Right.
proper Jew.
Yeah,
But
not a proper Jew, right?
that isn't incidental. That is talking to things that are baked in. That is baked into Zionism as a
Yeah.
political philosophy. If you go back to Theodor Herzl,
Mhm.
he actually divided Jews into what he called Juden and Yiden, which is literally Jews and Yids.
Yeah.
And the Yiden, the Yids, whereas he described it, they were kind of like they were the ones probably who most conformed to the, I suppose, the anti-Semitic stereotype of what a Jew is, whereas
Yeah.
the Juden were the more, they were the more Europeanized ones, and
Mhm.
who were basically there. They were fine with racism and fine with wiping out other ethnicities as long as it wasn't them.
As long as it wasn't them, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are seeing. I mean, dynamically, it's so interesting how that happens because we are seeing a very similar thing happening in LGBTQ communities at the moment with the attempt to divide us into separate camps. To
Yeah.
remove trans people and queer people
One
from that
reason,
umbrella.
one reason I've always had a certain wariness about certain forms of identity politics is because I see the parallels between that and the kind of discourse I've seen about Israel and Palestine, where essentially people, I've heard the term referred to as identitarian deference, the idea that on the face of it, completely reasonable idea that people who are from a marginalized community are the best placed to speak about their experiences of discrimination and hardship and so forth. The trouble is, of course, that there can then be an automatic assumption, well, this marginalized person is saying that such and such is racist or misogynist or whatever. So we're just going to default to the assumption that they're right.
Right. You also have the problem when you have certain members or people who are parts of those communities, but who they sort of weaponize it. Like one of the more recent examples would be Milo Yiannopoulos, who is was a right wing shill, just the most appalling narcissistic
cunt. Yes.
Just the worst person alive. And use the fact that he was a gay person who identified as right wing. Actually, what he wasn't even sincerely right wing. He was just a narcissist. He went with anyone who would give him a platform, anyone who would give him money or any kind of attention. That is a problem. That is a problem.
Yeah, like in porn, you have people who are gay for pay. In this case, he was being an arsehole for pay.
Yeah, and again, we are seeing it with. We are seeing it in the attempt to scapegoat and demonize trans people, which is happening at the moment. There are a lot of gay people, not all, but there are some very vocal members of gay communities who are anti-trans, and that I find to be absolutely amazing. I find to be absolutely incredible. I mean, what I find particularly amazing about it is that they just simply refuse to acknowledge that to our enemies, the people who want us all commonly destroyed, which they do, we're all common queers. It doesn't matter if you're gay,
even if you're gay or a furry or trans or whatever. It's
you might be useful for a brief period. If you are useful to their aim, which is largely extinctionist, they want to get rid of us, and they make that very clear. By the way, they make that very clear when they think no one else is listening. They make that absolutely clear. Then that's beyond that. That's it. You will be on the same trains as the rest of us. You may be the last herded on, and you'll be herded on saying, but wait, I'm one of the good ones. Wait, I'm not like this filthy lot, this lot here.
It's a bit like I don't know if you ever said someone did this as a spoof of one of Jack Chick's Bible tracks. It was like, worship Cthulhu, you will be eaten last, or you'll be eaten last, you'll be eaten first. I'm not quite sure which was considered to be the better end of the deal. Please let me taste your boot leather first.
It's exactly that. It is exactly that. It's self-serving. It's accommodationist, and it is something. I mean, in a bizarre way, I've spoken to a lot of my gay friends about this. My queer friends in general, actually, it is the double-edged sword of escalating acceptance and assimilation into society. So
there's the pull up the ladder. It's like we're safe now.
Yes, there is that problem. And you see it a lot.
The more you have, the more of a stake you have in a society, then the more invested you are in preserving it. If you're excluded from it, if you're an outsider, if you're marginalized, then you have less of a stake then you have more of a stake in trying to overturn that established order. You see it's like it's something we often see, something we'll see from people from all kinds of marginalized communities, that when they themselves, look how a very high percentage of Britain's Jewish community votes Conservative. A couple of 100 years ago, whereas now it's Muslims, whereas now it's people in small boats, whatever. Where they are now, that's where Jews were 100 years ago. They were the all-purpose scapegoat for all the shit that
the evils of the world, right? It was always the Jews' fault, right?
Yeah, and it'll come back to that. That's the other thing, of course, because again, you have in order to avoid. Most right-wing politics and an awful lot of centrist politics as well now is basically getting people to deny the evidence of their own eyes, of their own five senses. It's like, no, it's nothing to do with this blatantly obvious thing that's happening right in front of you. It's something else. So it breeds obviously, it breeds directly or indirectly, it breeds conspiracist thinking. It breeds explanations whereby it's all about how can these people simultaneously be pathetic and helpless, and at the same time be this terrifying. There's always the they behind it all, and that
There's always a they. Yeah, there's
that
always a they. There's got to be a scapegoat.
Sooner or later.
There has to be a scapegoat with regards to right-wing politics in general, universally, because it consists entirely of aesthetics. There's nothing underneath. There is no actual mechanism or policy or idea of tomorrow as such.
Yeah.
They have to scapegoat. There has to be a narrative whereby all of the evils that you are facing, that normal people are facing, it's as a result of this group. It's as a result of these groups. It's immigrants. It's Jews. It's liberals. It's Muslims. It's queer people. It's trans people.
Exactly. And the thing is, of course, it gives them an incredible advantage, because it's like there doesn't have to be any consistency. How many times have you've seen atrocious, vile behaviour from the right, and yet the left are held to this higher standard? Whereas, if somebody refers to, when Angela Rayner referred to the Tories quite accurately as scum at one point,
they are.
Which they are. Yeah, I mean, that's an insult to scum.
They are.
That's an insult to scum. I mean, I do quite like the fact, as somebody pointed out, that the new Tory leader's surname is actually Bad Enoch.
You cannot make it up, can you? That's the kind of thing that makes me paranoid. It twinges the paranoid part of my mind, and it makes me think this is written. This is insane. That some there's some celestial author, some satirist who's crafting reality. There must be, because that is insane.
Well, I mean, as with any sexist, if you're a woman in a sexist environment, you have to be several times as good, in limited value of good, as any man to rise. Same if you're in a racist organization. If you're a person of color, if you're a woman of color in the Conservative Party, you have to be basically wearing a swastika armband and fucking goose stepping. Which is what we had with Shitty Patel, with Suella Braverman, and now we've got with this fucking monstrosity.
The funny thing is, they have absolutely shot themselves in the foot with this, because the inherent sexism and racism of the Tory party and the right in general, I mean, she's not going to get anywhere. She's just not going to get anywhere.
I always imagine the kind of angry, self-hating wanks that so many Tory voters must have had over Priti Patel and because on the one hand, this is a brown woman. That's too, and on the other hand, this is like someone who is practically a raving fucking Nazi. So it's kind of like it's like you're furiously tugging one out while kind of beating yourself with a snotted rope.
It's what I call the Graham Linehan. I have no doubt that if we could get a hold of his hard drive, you would find oh god, the trans pornography on there it wouldn't just be the normal species of trans pornography. It would be the really dark web deep stuff, right? You just know it, don't you?
I could also imagine that being true.
But I mean, with people like Linehan, it is the extremity of it that I find the most amazing thing. Because when you do happen to look at where he is and what he's doing at any given time of the day, he's on Twitter all the time.
Again, this is about something if there is a clash, if there is a conflict of interest, then it's resolvable. And the important thing, everybody's goal here should be to figure out how to resolve any conflict or clash of interest there might be, so that we can get on with the business of protecting both groups' rights and with the people who want to destroy both groups' rights.
This is part of the irony of the anti-trans movement that I find to be the most amazing. It often markets itself as being a feminist movement. Yet its key figures consistently promote and play up to misogynists, like profound misogynists, fascists, etc.
I mean, I think there's been an element of, in some respects, there has been a tendency on the left to, and not just in this issue, as we know, but in a lot of other issues, to if somebody doesn't in complete lockstep agreement with your views, they're obviously, there's no difference between them and a complete fascist. And
and that's a problem.
When that happens, then then that can have a radicalizing effect on people. When because you are going to get, because you do get people I know a couple of people who I've seen some people who drifted very much into a right wing radicalization because of this. I've also seen people I know one feminist who's and again she has who is adamantly who is adamant that she does not wish trans people ill, but she is very, for example, very much about the idea that women need their own spaces, and that is women in terms of their biology, because, and again she's her focus is on domestic violence against women, and I can kind of understand where she's coming from, and she's very, very determinedly separated herself from the likes of Posey Parker or Kelly J. Keane or whatever she's called this week, saying, I do not agree with that. I'm not. Of course, she got vilified then by a bunch of Tommy Robinson fans and hardcore TERFs who were all calling her basically, handmaiden and everything. So what can you do? So there are people who are trying to walk that line, but I think those people now, it's going to be very hard to have a kind of discussion because again, you get this thing where there are an awful lot of people, often bearded white men, who seem to just really enjoy we've got a socially acceptable, virtuous excuse now for hurling horrible abuse at some women who have been uppity, and that you get that ploughing into it as well, and all that pushes people away from the left, and it pushes them, into a position where they get sucked in to the right. If there isn't a way. Again, what we need to be having dialogue with people. We need to be able to tell the difference between people we are largely in agreement with, but have differences of opinion of, and try to figure out how we can build bridges with them and form connections and fight against the things that threaten us all. Be able to distinguish between people like that and people like fucking Tommy Robinson.
I mean, that's part of the irony, isn't it? The people who loathe us all equally, trans people, queer people, women, they are laughing their asses off at this conflict, because part of them must know that the phenomenon of the existence of trans people, as is evident, poses no threat to women. No. We know this from countries that already have self-ID laws, for example. In fact, what you tend to find, the trend is that most of the countries that have that have lesser degrees of things like violence against women and sexual violence against women and so on and so forth, which, when you really think about it, kind of makes sense. It makes an incredible amount of sense. It's a very, very difficult one because people are largely not very well educated about this, and it is complex. It is an incredibly complex thing. I mean, I have a real problem with bringing these things down to biological essentialism, which is what a lot of people try to do. To me, it doesn't really matter about there are there are incredibly rigorous studies on things like the biology of trans men and trans women, and what distinguishes them, for example, from people who develop into cisgender men and women, and they are profound. I mean, a really good one was it was based on pathology, bizarrely, and pathologists largely have come out in absolute favor of trans rights and queer rights because they for decades they've known that there are trans people in a way that the rest of culture hasn't, for the simple reason that there are structures in the brains of both cisgender and trans women that are the same, but which are different from cisgender and trans men, and vice versa, consistently so. And that's amazing, isn't it? And they tend to be those parts of the brain that are telling the body you are this. That when they are telling the body, they are releasing hormones that are telling the body you are male or female, right? So when trans people are saying, "I am I am a man trapped in a woman's body," or "I'm whatever," that's absolutely true. It's true on a brute biological level, on a level that's measurable. It's not just this nebulous sort of feeling or whatever. It is something that is biologically
this is
ingrained.
Something I haven't actually been fully aware of. That is good. That is good. It's good to know, and it's a very useful counter argument to some of the things that you hear. But
then again, it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter. I mean, if we're gonna talk about that, then you have to talk. We're bringing it down to the level of semantics. A lot of the time, people ask, "Well, what is a woman?" Well, that's a problematic question. It's more problematic than most people would allow for, especially if we're talking about language and etymology, the history of language, and the application of that term. It's as is everything, as is absolutely everything.
One of the things that really as I said, I'd kind of been hovering back, I'd kind of been hovering in some ways, kind of back and forth in some on this. And then one of the things that really kind of snapped me into focus was the whole thing of Imam Khalif and the Olympics, and seeing that an awful lot of people were saying it's a man beating up a woman, and it's like, well, no, I mean, we're not talking. She's not a trans man. She's not a trans woman, which is what I presume you guys are getting at here. And all of a sudden, it became about, sort of, all these arguments about, well, she's got this kind of like hormonal yada yada yada. Oh, right, so you're basically admitting that it's not as simple as what's between somebody's legs, or no.
Right.
I mean, have you taken one of these tests, and what would happen if that test came back and said that
this is the thing. This is the thing, right? Their understanding, I mean, my experience of the anti-trans brigade is that their understanding of not just like biology, but anatomy and sex are high school at best. They're high school at best, and they're derived from bad 1970s textbook at best. They haven't done any reading beyond that, because if they did, they'd realize that sex is really not that simple. It really isn't. Like, experts in the field will tell you that it's not that simple. I mean, I'm not an expert in the field, but I actually work in an area where sort of sexual dimorphism is really common. I work in social support, and sexual dimorphism is actually really, really, really common in our area. There are people I've worked with who are intersex, and who would qualify by these standards as neither male nor female.
Intersex. I think you said insects, and I was like, what the fuck?
No, not quite there. Not yet. Anyway, haven't quite found that one yet. That would be interesting.
Scribbles note for a story.
Yeah, right. Social support for insects. That'd be an interesting one. But no, it is just not that simple. And they love to talk about chromosomes. It's not that simple. You can have chromosome, the XX chromosomes, and you can still be anatomically female, and vice versa.
What I saw with the Imam Khalif thing was a lot of people who I think just automatically made the assumption that she was trans,
right?
And then were basically rather than were just basically digging themselves in deeper rather than back down, and essentially tying themselves into knots so that they could keep on.
You see this even with, I mean, even in that example, you see examples of like what's happening is women who are completely cisgender, who would qualify as women under any categorization, are being attacked and are being humiliated because they don't conform to certain prescriptions of what a woman should look like.
Exactly.
Because they look by these terms masculine or whatever. And it's like, this is the end. This is the ultimate product. We were telling you this was going to happen.
And this is it's incredibly misogynistic. It's like, you're not a woman because you don't look girly enough.
Exactly. That's the irony, right? Because the standards of femininity or femaleness that these people are applying are patriarchal. They're anti-feminist. By their very definition, they're anti-feminist, right? I mean, this is something a lot of gay people in general really need to get. They need to remember as well. These are the same criticisms that were and paranoias that were leveled at us once upon a time, and still are to a certain degree. We also call into question gender norms and prescriptions because of our natures, because of what we are, because of the way we express love and affection and whatnot. We are also this.
And of course, sort of like you're going back to sort of like 19th century, early 20th century, earlier, people trying to sort of come up with initially the first sort of groping attempts to come up with sort of a psychological rationale for same-sex attraction was this idea of the third sex, the Uranian of people who were essentially women in men's bodies, if I remember rightly. So you're talking about you're kind of putting your finger on the right phenomenon, but that's not actually what's going on here,
right?
But it's
but it does demonstrate that we are all kin. We are those definitions that we are using are actually somewhat illegitimate. We are akin. We're all one. not
Yeah.
only in the eyes of our enemies, but we actually are in terms of what we represent within culture and within society. And personally, I mean, this is my own perspective, but I think it's almost what we're for. We exist to call into question those prescriptions. That's one of the best things we can do. We
Yeah.
do upset the status quo, and it's good. We force society and culture and history to ask questions about its assumptions of these things. And that is a good thing. And that's part of what the reaction is to. Ultimately, it is conservatively based. It's
Yeah.
from people who don't like difference, who don't like change. And it's where this assertion comes from. That transgender people just sprung out of nowhere quite recently. And the notion of queerness sprang out of nowhere quite recently. You have exactly the same with gay people, right? We're
Yeah,
having
that's
it
just
now,
certainly,
bizarrely.
certainly with same-sex relationships, we can trace that all the way back into prehistory.
Yeah, but same is true
Never
of
mind anything
trans
else.
people.
Now, in terms of being trans, I mean, in the perhaps the sense we might immediately recognise it. That might be because obviously we did. I mean, it wasn't until the 1920s that the first gender reassignment surgeries, or was it the
Mhm.
1930s, were happening with Lily Elbe and people like that.
Mhm.
But obviously there's always well, I think there's always been people who've identified
Yeah,
as the opposite sex, the opposite gender, and honestly, the guiding principle really should be: if you're not doing any harm to anyone else,
that's it,
what
right? Who
fucking
cares?
business is it of anybody else's?
Absolutely that. It
I
should
mean,
be incidental.
I've seen I've seen sort of anti sort of trans feminists who are
Mm.
obviously often, as you can imagine, overwhelmingly anti-sex work as well,
Mhm.
but also sort of have real issues with things like BDSM, which seems to be based on a fundamental misunderstanding, but it's also a real denial of any woman who wants to be hit is mentally ill. So there's is one of the statements I saw
Mhm.
on social, which is kind of like this total denial of a person's agency, or the idea that they might know their own mind. And again,
Yeah.
you ask anyone who knows anything about BDSM, who has any involvement in that lifestyle, which I do not, but I've
Mhm.
at least listened to a few people who
Yeah.
actually are. They will tell you there's something like 50 Shades of Grey. It's like a lot of them hate that book because
Right.
it's kind of like it's the worst, gives the worst possible impression of it, because the whole
Yeah.
point of of BDSM is it's consensual. It is
It's
safe.
consensual.
It's that
It's safe. Yeah.
it's a role play. You can stop it anytime you like.
Yeah.
You can stop it the moment it stops being safe. It stops being fun.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when anyone who's trying to stick their head, or any other part of their anatomy, into my bedroom without, unless I've invited them there, can take that part of their anatomy and insert it into another part of their anatomy, quite
Yeah.
frankly. And and keep on pushing until it sees daylight.
Totally.
I'm,
Absolutely that.
I'm preaching to the choir there, preaching to the perverted, as James Bennett.
Absolutely, as James, yeah, absolutely, which I'm reading at the moment, by the way.
I need to. He sent me a PDF of that, but
Uh,
my Kindle always fucks up PDFs. I'm actually gonna have to. I'm actually gonna have to buy. I'm gonna have to buy the damn thing.
you'd have to buy it, yeah. It's very
It's gonna
good,
be a terrible hardship.
as you'd expect. As you'd expect, it's very, very good indeed.
He's
But
actually
no,
been
I mean,
reading that book as well, a book of mine as well. I need to.
is it the same one? Is it the same one?
Dead
Is it
Man Dreaming. Again,
Dead
I
Man
wanted to
Dreaming?
get at least a couple of queer men's perspectives
Yeah,
on.
no, it is. I mean, it's a good thing to do because it is. I mean, you've set yourself up for a real difficult one with this one. Not only are you writing, like, principally from the perspective of gay guys, right? But also gay guys in the trenches of World War One.
Hmm,
And I mean, there's a whole other raft of psychology and influence and cultural status there. It's
yeah,
so. I mean, that would be difficult for a gay person to do, to put
yeah.
themselves into that, you know,
Why do I do this
this
shit to myself?
right, right. I mean, I've more or less finished the book now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. By the way, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I did really buy the characters as gay. I really did. They come off as gay. I mean, one of the issues that comes up when straight authors try to write gay characters, obviously, is that there is a tendency for them to go one way or the other. They either write basically straight characters and incidentally call them gay, which is problematic
Or they
because
write
it's
John
part,
Inman.
or that, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one or the other, right? And both are somewhat illegitimate, and any gay reader will look at it and go, "That doesn't work." You know, they'll be like, "I don't feel that. I don't connect with that."
Yeah.
Because, of course, being queer or being gay, it will influence who you are. It influences what you are and the way you perceive the world. And in this instance, because it is set in a profoundly homophobic society and cultural
Yeah.
condition, you know, that's what got me about the book more than anything, actually. I really, really like the way there is that internalized homophobia, which is really profound. These guys have kind of accepted that they are diseased, that there's something wrong with them, and either they've used it as a springboard into better positions or not. You know, it's really interesting, and I liked that. I really appreciated that.
It was one of the most. I mean, it was one of the things that I was most worried about with the book because, on the one hand, you do not want to be playing into any offensive stereotypes or be
I,
seem to be kind of sort of saying that, oh, there's something wrong with being gay, which obviously you don't want to do. And at
right,
the
right,
same time, it's like how would a gay man in early 1920s Britain have
exactly.
seen himself? What is the most how
Mm,
positive a view of himself and his own sexuality could he
mm,
have? Ironically, they'd have a much easier time of it if they were in 1920 in Germany at the same time,
right,
which which is kind of like the first kind of gay rights movement was in
right.
Germany of all places. Like,
Amazing. I mean, well, how amazing to think. I mean, it is. I mean, when you go back and look, I mean, obviously, this is a history that's been essentially repressed for the longest time in this culture. But homosexuality on the front was huge. I mean, when you think about it, obviously it was. Of course, it
well,
was.
yeah,
When you look at what happens when you put lots of men together in an isolated environment, tends to happen. You know, it just
yeah,
tends to
especially when you
happen.
could
You
get
know,
blown to smithereens at any, or be marched over a trench to be machine gunned in the
yeah.
hundreds at any.
Well,
There's a Billy Bragg song, "Tender Comrade," which kind
mhm.
of explores that whole thing.
Well, I mean, I've read one of the things I did do very recently was I got books of that have been published now, thankfully, of letters from guys who were on the front, who were in the trenches of World War I, and they were either, I mean, it's very complex. They were either gay or they did not identify as gay, but they had a same-sex romance on front, and they stayed in touch. They survived, they stayed in touch, and sometimes continued those relationships, obviously in secret. They were effectively affairs and long
Yeah,
distance for the most part, and it's
but
just
there's no
amazing to read.
of how many of these relationships would have happened without the war. Would these well, this is a case of people discovering their sexuality, or a case of people behaving in a way that they wouldn't under normal circumstances in an effort to achieve some
Right.
emotional connection and physical intimacy that you're going to desperately need. I mean, you obviously hear about this kind of stuff happening in prison as well, of course.
Yep, of
Um,
course.
it's
In the armed forces, you know, it's very, it's
in the
infamous.
Navy particularly. That's the
Yeah, it's infamous, you know. Um,
rum sodomy in the lash.
One of the things that got me about those letters in particular was that moment where that moment of revelation that they experience when they're looking around at a world that's falling apart, at a world that is everything in culture and society and history is fed into this atrocity, this mechanized, industrialized hell on earth, which is what it was.
Oh God, yeah,
And they think to themselves, why why am I denying myself? Why do I feel terrible about this? Why am I being made to feel bad about this when this is what that world has
yeah. You know,
created?
it's fine to gas people, blow them up, machine gun them, stab and batter them in trench fights, but a blow, but sucking
Right.
another soldier off would be like
Right.
sort of
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there are accounts of what happened to the guys who were caught,
yeah,
and it's horrific. It's something that you'll never see, like you will almost never see on any kind of mainstream media here in the UK, particularly around this period, because we are in our sort of remembrance era at the moment. You will
yeah.
never see it. But the stuff that was done to the men who were quote unquote caught was fucking horrific. It was horrific. It was torture. It was evil. It beyond evil, you know.
I mean, I've no
Because
doubt. I don't know the details of what other kind of stuff that was done, but I can probably
you can,
make
yeah,
some educated guesses as to it.
yeah.
But
It's yeah. I mean, it was evil because, of course, I mean, you have to bear in mind again, homosexuality was not only culturally, it was one of the worst things you could be as a man. It was one of the worst things you could
oh yeah.
be designated as.
Oh God, I
And it was
remember
also
that from
illegal.
going up in the 80s.
Yeah.
I went to an all boys private school,
Mhm.
and being accused of being gay was pretty much as bad as was pretty much the worst. It was pretty much the worst thing you could be considered to be. It was the worst insult. It was,
Yes.
and the failure to sort of measure up to whatever standard of particular standard of masculinity was, was a very very bad thing.
Oh, if you,
Um,
I mean, I was sort of like, I was sort of late 80s and through the early 90s. And even then, the worst thing as a boy, the worst thing you could be designated was gay. If that sort of got around, then
and
you were fucked,
yeah,
basically.
I have to. I'm not in the way you'd want to be.
No,
Um,
exactly.
and I have to give Tony Blair credit for it, much as after Iraq and everything, I thought it was an absolute arsehole. But because I can remember how much discrimination there was against gay people pre 1997. I remember. You'd often hear people would do a job without reproach for ages, then the boss
Yep,
would discover they're gay and they get sacked.
that's it. You were
Um,
done, right?
yeah, and again, Blair did bring in a whole raft of employment laws that prevented people from discriminating against people for that, or for the color, or for their skin color, or for
Yeah,
whatever. And that was a huge, huge step. And it's
the
kind of like,
significance. It was, and there were cultural things that were happening too. I mean, there were things that were just happening in culture, and largely driven by media, by fictional media. There were, I mean, I remember when Queer as Folk hit our television screens,
oh, I
and
remember, yeah,
that was epoch making. That for gay guys, that was epoch making because for the first time ever, really, you had a legitimate depiction of gay relationships. You had a series that focused almost exclusively on gay guys. All the protagonists were gay.
yeah.
And of course, I mean, these days that doesn't sound terribly remarkable because that you can find that on any streaming service these days.
Not
But
then you
back
couldn't.
then,
It was
that
really
was
groundbreaking.
oh, it really was. I remember seeing a an interview that because Russell T Davies, I mean, the right wing
Yeah,
media absolutely pilloried him,
I can
but he
imagine.
went on. He did a sort of it was like a communal interview that he did with people from all over the political and ideological spectrum, and he was talking about how what his ambition with the show was to portray the truth. It was warts and all, it was warts and all as well. He wanted
Yeah,
to show the truth of what gay relationships were like. He wanted to show that there actually was, there are differences often between the relationships that gay guys have and straight guys and straight women and so on
yeah,
and so forth. And one of the things he did, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, he played a clip of one of the sex scenes from Queer as Folk, which were really, I mean, again, the sex scenes in Queer as Folk were groundbreaking
yeah,
because they were very real. They were very truthful as to what gay guys do. Yeah, they actually showed you what sex was like between gay guys, and it portrayed a particular sex act. And you got a few sort of, from the audience, you got a bit of. And he stopped the clip and he said, "Well, how many of you? I'm going to talk to you straight guys now. How many of you have done that with your girlfriends?" And all the hands went up, and he was like, "Well, yeah, there you are." There you are. There are differences, but there are incredible similarities as well.
yeah.
Ultimately,
And it's like,
whatever differences exist, we're just people.
I mean, the impression I've certainly formed, certainly from, I mean, from writing certainly from writing, Dead Man Dreaming, and the scenes about Straker kind of growing up and coming to terms with his own sexuality, was that if there is a strong traditional culture of a lot of casual sex in gay culture, that's kind of like been kind of a necessity, because it's like, how else are you going to have any kind of encounter? You can't just you know go out and meet some and and be introduced. You have to kind of find a situation where you can just have that kind of intimacy, however brief and impersonal it may be.
Yes,
um
exactly that. Exactly that. And also, you have to bear in mind the other great taboo, and this would have existed within the minds of gay guys as well at that
Mm,
time, and really right up until the 1990s, and it's even still internalized in some of us now.
yeah,
But the notion that intimacy, like emotional intimacy with another man, that's somehow worse from a patriarchal perspective, isn't it? That's
yeah,
somehow worse to be that open and that vulnerable with another man.
yeah.
That is the great taboo.
I
And
could
that
also
would have existed in their minds as well, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can also see the other thing as well. It's one thing to have, a brief physical, sort of shag or whatever up against a
Yeah.
tree. It's quite another to expose yourself to a more a more emotionally intimate
Mm.
relationship with all the risks that go with that, because then you
Oh,
have something long term that's more likely to be exposed. There's the harm if there's the
yeah.
pain if that relationship
Mm.
is brought to an end, especially by the
Right.
police or by that
Well, not
person.
to no spoilers as such, but you kind of wrestle with the problems of this in Dead Man Dreaming, don't you? So where do you go? That's the other thing people who must have been thinking about. Even if you do manage to establish some kind of romantic or domestic relationship at that time, where do you go? Where can it go? What can you do? The best you can hope for, the very best you can hope for, is that you're regarded as the pair of eccentric bachelors who live on the corner, right?
Yeah,
That's the best you can hope for. Worst case scenario, well, the worst case scenario is literally that you are arrested, or you're
yeah,
lynched, or you are beaten to death, or that's the worst case scenario,
yeah.
and not a terribly unlikely one, unfortunately.
No, I mean, I remember reading. I read not quite a while now, but I read E.M. Forster's Morris, which of course
Mhm.
was never published in his lifetime.
Right.
Um, but is that whole thing of well, he has that kind of intimacy initially with his friend. I think it's Alec. No, no, not
Mhm.
Alec. Um, with somebody of his own class, at sort of
Yeah, yeah.
at college. But it's kind of like, okay, we're attracted to one another, but as long as we don't act on it, it's okay. It can be a kind of platonic blah blah. And he kind of realizes, he goes, well, no, I want more than that. And he
Yeah.
actually, I have shared with with that, or whatever it is, which is the term that's used. And I think apparently at one point he did have a sort of epilogue in mind where one of Morris's sisters bumps into this couple of sort of bearded charcoal burners or something living in the middle of a wood somewhere, which presumably is supposed to be. But of course, Morris just, as it were, buggers off, and you're left to sort of, he's going off with this other person, with this other guy somewhere.
Uh,
We do not know, where, but it's a necessary act of courage and risk, essentially.
I mean, it's just so fascinating. I mean, I talk to younger. I've spoken to younger gay guys who came out when they were at high school,
Yeah,
and I mean, as a kid of the 80s and 90s, so historically yesterday, just
yeah,
yesterday, and
yeah,
I am like, that is amazing because
yeah.
that was unthinkable. It
Oh
was
God, yeah. If you're like
unthinkable.
me, then especially if you're like me, of course, I still struggle to contemplate the idea that 1990 was more than 10 years ago.
Oh, stop it. Stop it. Yeah, no, let's not. It's when they refer to it as the late 20th century. And it's like, no,
At this point, you
stop.
are, listen here, you little shit.
Yeah, right. It's like, stop it. Bloody hell.
I had this kind of jolt when I sort of was I looked up sort of about the band Deacon Blue, and I didn't realise that I've only seen a couple of their songs over the years, and I knew that I didn't realise there were two lead singers, a man and a woman, and it's like they got married in 1990, and they're still together. Oh, that's sweet. They've been married for 34. What do you mean 34 years? That can't be right.
Oh, sadly. Yeah, sadly is. Yeah, sadly so. But I mean, we've existed through that period of change because I often feel very lucky. I often feel very lucky because I was young enough to avoid the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah,
I was young enough to avoid the worst of that. I wasn't sexually active until much later. I was born in 1984, so
yeah.
born at
You'd have to
height.
got started a lot, pretty damned early to
Yeah,
be at
pretty
risk there.
goddamn early. Yeah, I mean, it's still obviously it's still there. It's still a concern, and it always
Yeah,
will be. But I was lucky enough to become sexually active at the time when that became part of our history, and so we were aware. we were aware of what to do, what not to do to avoid the damn thing. But to
So that
see
first wave,
trans-
because it had such a long incubation period,
oh, God.
and there was so much, you know, you get that once that gets into an environment where there was a lot of casual and protected encounters going on. By the time you actually realise there's a problem, it's spread like wildfire.
It's
That's the
just,
most horrifying thing.
I mean, that is one of the things I feel obliged, as a sort of latter generation gay guy, I suppose, to understand. It's something I actively explore, what experiences of the AIDS epidemic. I even know guys who were alive at the time, you know, who are older than me,
Yeah.
and they describe. I mean, it's hard to get your head around. It's hard to wrap your head around death, the suffering, the privation.
A couple of books by a dude called J.B. Laws, a young American gay male horror writer, and he actually died of AIDS at the age of 34.
Yeah.
And I think it may have been the early 90s, but he was able to write two horror novels, and I think a lot of that's drawing on his experience as a gay man. I can't remember if the experience of the AIDS epidemic fed into them. I'd be surprised if they didn't. But yeah, they may. I haven't had I've got them in my Kindle. I still haven't bloody read them yet. But if you've not read him, I suspect you probably find him very interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look. Definitely. But it is. So, I mean, I can't wrap my head around it. The suffering, but it's the isolation too. I mean, this was a time when, and it's something queer people do generally still do actually, but not to the same degree. This was at a time when most gay guys were outcast from their family units. They were exiled from their family units for obvious reasons. And they tended to form their own communities. They formed their own little families from the club cultures, from friends, from casual lovers, from partners, etc., etc. And the way they were just left, because of course this extended family would not be allowed access to them, legally speaking.
Yeah, because they weren't officially there was no familial relationship.
I mean, it's evil. I mean, it is evil, and I will refer people, gay guys who are maybe a little bit too comfortable now. I will refer back to that era and say, look, that's what they did to us. That's how they left us, And given the opportunity, given the right circumstances, that will happen again.
Yeah,
something like that will happen again. You need to be on guard all the time. I'm really sorry, but you do. It doesn't matter what degree of social approbation you might have or political approbation you might have. It's still there. As long as we operate in these systems where there is requirement for scapegoating, then it's going to happen. We're ready made for it. We're ready made for it, And to invite it in as well, when gay people invite it in and try to accommodate it, when they join the anti-trans movements or whatever, it's like you are harming yourselves. This is an act of self-mutilation.
Yeah, it's not gonna save you.
No, it isn't. It isn't going to save you. That's it. That is exactly it. It is not going to save you. But you know what is really lovely now? I mean, it is a complex issue. It's a really complex issue because, of course, although we are currently in this period where queer writers are just exploding across genre fiction. We are everywhere. And it's really lovely to see. Historically speaking, that is still very recent. I mean, that is still very recent. I mean, genre fiction is still generally the purview of, primarily straight white guys. It is primarily the purview of straight white guys. That is changing. But it is wonderful from my perspective. It's actually wonderful to see straight writers kind of grappling with that experience now of actually writing queer characters and gay characters and whatnot. I really like to see that. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It is like everything. It's complex. It has its own internal politics. I mean, there is the thing that obviously we need the space and we need to be allowed to talk about our own experiences from our own perspective. Obviously that's the case. But I do like the fact, I find it very heartening myself that you are now getting straight writers, cisgender writers, exploring these different experiences. I think that's great, and the different identities and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand any writer who doesn't want to try and extend themselves in that way. I mean, I get. I mean, to an extent, you can say every character is a version of the author, but why would you not want to sort of? I mean, you have that imaginative toolbox where you can
absolutely.
Where you can get. I mean, of course, you can be like Woody Allen and always you do increasingly just play various iterations of the same sort of like angst-ridden nerd lusting after women with an ever increasing age gap. But again, he's done brilliant work with that. He's done things like Annie Hall, which is an amazing film. But at the same time, why would you? And I know many great writers who have, you have their own. I mean, and they're always going to be the themes that you return to obsessively in your work. But that's going to be there whenever you write. So why would you not try to, you can, because you can go anywhere. You can
absolutely right.
You can go anywhere. You can be anyone. Why would you not try to do that?
Right, and you can understand on a very intimate level what is going on when you start to explore people in these situations who have identities that are removed from your own, right? And I love that. I think that is part and parcel of the exercise. It's kind of what the exercise is for, right? It necessarily breeds empathy and understanding, or it should, if you're doing it correctly, right? If you're doing it legitimately. I mean, like, can I ask, where did it come from? Like, what was the spur for this one?
You're going to say the sperm.
No.
Funnily enough, it was literally one word. I've done this a couple of times where I've been stuck in terms of what to write next, and I literally turned to Kate, to my wife, and said, "Give me a word." I mean, I think the first word was twat, and I was like, "No, not words that you want to call me." I just gave me the word moon. And so I just wrote a sentence with that word in it, which is the opening sentence of the book. And it just kind of, and so that became a paragraph, and that began. But my rule was, okay, use that word in a sentence, and just keep going, and just keep going for like 100 words or a page, or whatever. And before I knew it, I had a scene, and I had. And the thing was, there was other stuff that had been going on for a while, that I'd been wanting to write for a while. Like, I've always been interested in this culture, this rumor. I mean, the idea of these deserter gangs, which is a big thing on it. And the thing is, it's one of those. I mean, I tried to research it a bit to try and find out the fact, what factual basis there was, and it really is one of those things. There's very little. There's very little
documentation, right?
Officially, there's nothing. It's all friend of a friend kind of stories. One interesting book that I did read is a book called Behind the Lines by W.F. I think it is W.F. Morris, who was actually a World War I veteran, and he writes his main character is a British officer who kills another officer, who is the other officer being an absolute arsehole. It's a fight and the guy gets killed accidentally, but he thoroughly deserves it. But of course, our hero cannot exactly. He's basically still fucked either way, so he has to run, and he has to desert, and basically he ends up taking up residence in some abandoned set of trenches. So, I mean, of course, and whether these things had any factual basis or not, of course, Morris had the knowledge of he'd been in that place at that time, so he could create it with some degree of authority. And it was just kind of like, I found the idea of it fascinating. I mean, of course, there's all these kind of also kind of urban legends, if you can really call it urban, around the group, around the trenches of what was out there. There were the deserted soldiers who were like the angels of the battlefield. They were like they left the concrete and they tended to the sick. And then you have the kind of the demonic version of these creatures that had kind of devolved into kind of bestial, cannibalistic things. And it was like, well, what would happen? I mean, there were American deserters apparently tended to fuck off to Paris and become gangsters. Surprise to fucking prize.
Right.
But I mean, there was this thing of, well, how would you look? Because it's very hard. It would be very hard in that situation. Morris's character in Behind the Lines gets to it because he's an officer. He's able to sort of like dress himself up as a padre, go into one village and pass him, and basically get a chit so he can draw rations for him and this other soldier he's kind of holed up with. And so Morris kind of gives him a way of surviving without having to do anything reprehensible. Whereas there's another gang of deserters who literally they'll just go into a village, beat people up, and just steal whatever's not nailed down. And of course, in that situation, I mean, the thing is, it wouldn't be about whether you were a bad person or not. It's like, if you want to live, you've got to get food from somewhere.
Yeah.
So I tried to find ways that, obviously, so there was that thing. And I don't know when I decided he was going to be gay. It kind of happened. Obviously, it happened sometime during the second chapter.
Yeah,
or the first chapter after the prologue, kind of thing. When you
that's interesting, because it works so well. I mean, there's so many layers added in by making him gay. So much that's added into it, to the experience of it.
Yeah, and I had no idea it was going to go there. I know. When I started to write, I mean, I had this idea. I'd had something that when you kind of start effectively improvising, as I was. Of course, there's lots of other. Every writer's hard drive is littered with the bones of projects that have crashed and burned or died or whatever. And I had this idea of, as I say, because I've always long been fascinated with this idea of these gangs of deserters. Because, as I said, on one level, when you think about the insanity of the Western Front, as we were saying before, it's like, well, the idea of saying, fuck this, I'm not going to do it anymore. I am fucking off and, hiding somewhere, is actually a pretty sane response to it.
It is the most sane response you could possibly have. I mean, I have a lot of time for the deserters in World War One. I'll be honest.
At the same time, if you do it, then you put yourself in a situation, like I was just saying, it's very hard to survive without becoming, you're not necessarily a bad person for deserting. And indeed, there were people who were like decorators. There were people with VCs who broke and deserted. Because everybody has got their limit and they can only take so much. But no matter what kind of a person you are, if you want to live, you've got to get food from somewhere. You've got to get shelter from somewhere. You've got to get fuel for heating. You've got to get all that kind of stuff. How are you? And you've got to find ways of making that life bearable, especially as you're still in a situation where you can't afford to think about the future, because if you don't get captured and probably shot out of hand, what happens when the war's over? How do you go home?
How do you go home again?
So it becomes difficult about return. And I just had this idea of maybe a character you make a good kind of motor for a plot would be somebody who is hired or forced, because he's basically going to. Originally, my original idea was going to be he was like due to be executed or something for something, and it was like, well, no, I'm going to hire you to go and find my son who disappeared around that time. But at some point, I just came up with this idea of making him gay, and I honestly don't know what prompted it, but it just developed, and the whole book, is so much becomes so much more interesting. Became a so much more interesting book because of that.
It feels like a locking in moment. It feels like that's when it becomes what it's meant to be, It
meant that it could become a love story as well, without because otherwise I mean, I suppose if I could have made Emily Calladine a straight woman, and she would have probably someone to suck an egg out her ass, as she tells various people throughout the book. But no, it just, again, when it becomes a love story, and it gives him that kind of personal stake, as again, rather than just someone who's having to do this because he's being forced into it. Then it just boom, and it just, it there were various, I think it was a way to explore certain things about myself as well. And it became such an interesting, but I still don't know where Mr. Brotherhood came from, though.
I like him. He's so interesting. He's almost like there's something almost lingeringly supernatural there, isn't there?
It's kind of like I'm not quite sure where he wandered in from. He seems to. It sounds like he always seems to walk in from a slightly different world. To everybody else.
I like the way when he occurs, there's always this sense that the others are kind of looking at him askance, and it's like, what the hell is going on? Why is he here? What is that?
even from his sister, So,
even from his sister, right?
It was great.
he has that quality of being preternaturally capable as well, doesn't he? Like he
Yes.
always knows what to do and what's going on and how to solve any given issue or problem. Usually
Yes.
with in awful ways, but he does know how to solve it.
Yes, I couldn't resist having a little nod to Blake Seven around the is he dead? He is now. So
He is
spoiler. This
yeah.
hasn't got a publisher yet. You know, by
Yeah. By
agency,
the way,
seen it
yeah,
yet.
way too many specific spoilers. Oh.
It was fun to. I mean, I mean, of course, a lot of the time, once you can see a character in your mind's eye and imagine kind of who'd play them in the movie. I think I'm not quite sure if I thought I'm not quite sure if I ever quite figured out who Straker would be. Actually, no, maybe Russell Tovey, a young Russell Tovey. But I sort of various once you can cast different people in your mind's eye, they immediately kind of and once you have an idea of how they talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, the great thing about if you're writing characters who are speaking English, you can throw in all these different accents, which immediately can establish all sorts of, differentiate them and make them much more interesting in your head. And of course, I had to use the Senegalese Terreur in there somewhere, so I get one of those in, and just it's kind of with one. There's one character who's the girlfriend of a deserter. And I was trying to kind of picture who'd play her, and I kept sort of thinking, because I kept thinking, she's imagining she's going to be this, sweet young innocent. I thought, fuck that. No, go in a different direction. I said, imagine she was being played by Miranda Hart, basically. Imagine this kind of like this quite tall, quite striking, but not woman who not necessarily not someone who would necessarily conform to conventional beauty standards, but who has nonetheless got enormous presence.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like all of a sudden that makes the relationship different. It gives it a different dynamic. It makes it. It's always. I mean, a lot of the time, it's often a case of how do I cast in a hand. It's kind of like another reason for not just making all your characters straight white males, or whatever. It's like make it more interesting. Do things because you have you have a character or a relationship between characters that's not what people expect, and that immediately brings another element, and it immediately makes it different, makes it more complex, makes it more interesting. So again, why would you not do that?
I mean, it literally makes it more colourful, right? It just makes it pop a bit more, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and because as well, the other thing, and of course, the other thing was, people think of when people think of the Western Front in World War One, they think of two basically bunches of white guys trying to kill each other,
which is obviously totally ahistorical, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of colonials, especially from the Allied side, from Britain, from France. I'm not sure what if the German. I'm not quite sure about German colonial troops. If they,
not sure.
Yeah, I mean the Germans did have, as they say, Blackadder goes forth. The German Empire, currently consists of a small sausage factory in Tanganyika. Slight exaggeration, but there's a certain amount of truth in that. The big empire. I mean, the empires that disintegrated after World War One were basically the European land empires. Russia to an extent. Turkey, obviously, Austro-Hungary, which I always find just a fascinating subject in and of itself. Such a weird and wonderful, and I love these really wonderful Baroque names that people would have in the Habsburg Empire and Germany, and all those kind of like flew apart, and you had all these new countries popping up,
tiny little countries popping up all over the place,
and often very bloodily, because they were being demarcated along sort of ethnic nationalist lines. It's like, this is Hungary for Hungary. Well, actually, all these people living here are like Romanians, are they? Not anymore. There was a lot of people establishing the facts on the ground by very brutal methods. In fact, there's a good case to be made that if you were living east of the Rhine, World War One didn't really end until 1923, because there was a lot of violence and upheaval going on in all mostly of the countries of the empires that had been defeated and had broken up during in the aftermath and at the end of World War One. A lot of it, because of course there's as well as all the new nations that were kind of like battling themselves into being and trying to grab bits of territory off one another. You also had communist revolutions and counter revolutions going on, like in Hungary and in Germany, to name but two. So you had to. There was this. It was
upheaval, complex and chaotic and insane, right? I mean, historians have their work cut out, don't they? They really.
A fascinating book was The Vanquished by Robert Gerbath. He writes all about those countries and all the kind of the little wars. I mean, the Greeks had this whole idea that they wanted to kind of grab a chunk of territory, sort of like on in like Anatolia and Pontus, and that ended up, incredibly bloody violence and with a vast amount of ethnic cleansing, with a hell of a lot of ethnic Greeks to put them displaced from Anatolia, Pontus, and Thrace into modern Greece. So there's, I mean, that not like that. This was a few years after the Armenian genocide. So there was a hell of a lot of blood soaking into that particular, and of course Italy, which had officially been technically been one of the winners, still came out with a lot of people dead and nowhere near as much territory as they thought they should have.
They thought, yeah.
And which caused a lot of upheaval, which eventually led to a certain posturing twat called Mussolini, who looked like he was dressed for Mardi Gras. There was a wonderful article, and I know Johan Hari has looked at askance in all sorts of ways now, but he did a wonderful piece about sort of the. He said someone really needs to write about the kind of the links between gay culture and the far right. Because you look at people like Mussolini, and he looks like they do look like they're dressed for a pride march, and of course in the essay you had Ernst Röhm, who was like,
right, absolutely, yeah.
But he has a wonderful thing about how he went at two instances where he basically on one instance he went undercover at the Finsbury Park Mosque when Abu Hamza was posting this. Says, let me spoiler alert: this is not going to end with me shagging Abu Hamza, but he did get off with a young Muslim guy who, despite the fact that this guy being listening to, he said he did suggest that given that we've just been having wild gay sex, possibly homosexuality isn't quite as evil
as bad, yeah.
But the other one went undercover like some kind of neo-Nazi event, and there was some.
Oh my God! Honestly, if you ever went to a far right rally of any kind, or any kind of ideological extremist rally where there are lots of guys, it doesn't matter what ideology it is, by the way, and turn on Grindr, you will get things from all over the shop. You will. It's well known. It is a thing that happens,
Well, he ended the article by saying, on the one hand, yes, these guys got dreadful views, but on the other hand, there's a certain pride in bagging a homophobe, and it's knowing that we gays are literally everywhere, including literally inside homophobes.
It's true. I mean, it is. I mean, like on an individual level, it's absolutely true. But it's also true ideologically. You go to any of the churches, any of the evangelical gatherings, any kind of extremist ideology, you are gonna find the gay guys. They are gonna be there, and they're gonna be having sex. It's just the way it is, one way or another. They're gonna be engaged. It's just the way it is.
There was a meme going around on Facebook a while back, and it was like, "Oh, my grandson. I love him so much. He's got this app on his phone called Grindr, which downloads Bible verses for him to learn." And someone says, "Oh yes, that's fantastic. My husband's got that as well."
It is. I mean, I've spoken to Kit Power about this, but it is a well-known thing in gay culture. I mean, like in my area where I live in a Midlands town, ex-mining town. And when I go on Grindr, primarily it is not gay guys. Oh, it's not guys who identify as gay. It is, it's sad to say, it's married guys who identify as straight, primarily. And that is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it fascinating?
It is it's very, I mean, of course, the thing is, I mean, there's the other thing, of course, you don't, especially when you're in a very homophobic culture, and you internalize a lot of the ideas about what it is to be masculine. And so even if you think, there's nothing wrong with being gay, but I personally am not.
Right.
I'm not attracted to men.
Yeah.
So you might not really be able to be willing to accept you're gay or bi
Right.
until
Absolutely.
and you're not gonna you don't want to break up. You may be you can be perfectly happy in your relationship, but at the same time you still it's
Have
like
this side of you. You have this. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the most complex things, actually. And again, it's something that I believe we spoke about actually in one of our messages. One of the things about gay guys in previous eras may not have even known what they were or what they were feeling because they had no context for it. They didn't have the language
yeah.
for it for the longest time.
Yeah,
For the
I mean,
longest time.
for years, people often, when they're, what kind of gay subculture there was often modelling itself on like ancient Greece or Rome.
Mm.
The idea of the older man and the younger.
Yeah, which again, I mean that is pervasive in queer culture. Yeah, absolutely. When I was a young gay guy, I used to go for older guys. Used to, I still do, to a certain degree. It is just the way of it. It is part. It's so ingrained that it's so
Yeah,
ingrained in gay guy culture. And again, a part of it derives from our alienation from family units too, of course, because
of
we
course.
are often looking for mentors. We're looking for when we're younger, we're looking for someone who can show us what this means or what our identities are.
Well, yeah,
Or
especially when I mean, till comparatively recently with Section 28 and stuff.
yeah,
If you were gay growing up, how were you going to? You would have very little idea of what to do or what it
really.
was. I mean, the sex education at school was often
Oh,
was crap enough to begin. Was crap enough.
I was going to say it's
It
bad
was,
enough. It was bad enough for straight people, wasn't it? Because I remember even when I was at school, it was all about procreation. There was no mention of pleasure at all, or like connection or community or anything like that. And
yeah,
as for homos, anything that wasn't strictly straight, no, just
yeah,
not a. I mean, we actually studied Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon. We studied their poems, and not once was it even hinted at that they were gay.
yeah.
Not
I didn't realize that until many. I mean, I always loved Owen's poetry, but it wasn't until many years. And the Dead Man Dreaming is interspersed with quotes from Owen.
course.
But I mean, yeah, but it wasn't until I mean, a lot of those First World War poets were. I mean, Rupert Brooke was
Hmm.
bisexual. Seems to have been at it with pretty much
Hmm.
uh, with anyone who'd have him. I think, and he was considered to be one of the most beautiful young men of his generation, which
Oh yeah.
probably didn't help. And the poor sod, of course, never even saw action. He died of like an infected insect bite or something stupid like that.
Something
Before
absurd like that.
yeah, yeah. Of course, it'd be interesting to see what he would have written had he ever actually seen the reality
Yeah.
of
Right.
conflicts. I mean, so many. I mean, Charles Hamilton Sawley was another another poet I admire greatly. I mean, he only produced a very small body of work before he was killed in 1915. So you've got that whole generation who were sort of snuffed out. Of course, how many of them would have? Because so many of them were the war gave them a real subject to
Yeah.
write about.
Well, I mean,
Which,
it's the defining thing. How can it not be?
yeah,
It is there can be nothing more traumatic and significant than that, surely.
not that I mean, it'd be hard to imagine. Hard to imagine what.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine
The,
anything that.
the
Anything,
industrialized death of civilization, the end of history,
yeah,
uh, the meat grinder
I
of
mean,
innocence.
another thing that kind of fed into to Dead Man Dreaming was when I read about the Zone Rouge in France, the
Mhm.
Red Zone, which is, I mean, still exists now.
Yeah.
Smaller than it was. It's non-contiguous. There are, it's a series of areas, but areas which are still unfit for human habitation. They're still contaminated by the products of warfare, not just poison gas, but the compounds used in explosive shells and stuff like that. I mean, that's to say nothing of all the unexploded. I mean, they are still to this
Mhm.
day bringing up the iron harvest, plowing up, unexploded World War One arsenic. There's in Belgium. There is this huge arms dump called
Mhm.
Hulst. I don't know how to pronounce it. Where basically they're basically stockpiling Christ knows how many chlorine and phosgene and other poison gas shells, because it's like, what do we do with it? At one point, they dumped that stuff into the sea, but that's not considered a good thing to do now.
No.
And it takes a very, very long time to safely dispose that. And some of these shells, they've got all that's stopping them going kaboomf is this very, very thin little spring that's going to be very, very rusty after over 100 years in the ground.
Yeah, right.
When you contemplate that, it's because it's kind of like you want to talk about the lasting effects, the scars of war. Well, you don't need to use a metaphor here. It's fucking literal.
It is literal. Yeah. There's no metaphor here, right? It is absolutely literal. I mean, there is, there is the usual voices rising at the moment, because there is an LGBTQ poppy now. There is a rainbow poppy, which it basically commemorates the forgotten history, the history that's been repressed of the the queer soldiers on the front. So it's a history that has just been denied to us. It's just been completely and utterly repressed. And of course, the usual ahistorical voices are popping up and saying things like, "Oh, can't we just have this? Oh, why are you infiltrating?" We were there.
Shut up, Lawrence Fox. Go and check your grinder again.
We were there. You can't. It's not exclusive. It's not like a gatekeeping situation.
You do kind of wonder if Lawrence Fox is ever going to get kind of caught on Grindr, or if he is, do we really want anyone to know?
I was going to say, you know what? We don't want him. You lot can. We don't want him. That's what I always say. We don't want him.
Just reminds me of I think Newsthub did that spoof article with pretending to be by Billy Piper, says, "Now you get why I dumped him."
I bet she has said that. I bet she has had cause to say that. My God, wouldn't you just? Jesus.
You just wonder how much of this was before he was. How much of this arsehole was there before he got divorced, and how much came out. Some guys just do not handle the breakup of a marriage very well at all, and just go completely.
Well, clearly, I mean, my God, I mean, the vacuum of identity and personality that is obvious, that is evident in people like Lawrence Fox, I just find difficult to comprehend. I find it difficult to get like a bead on.
I mean, certainly I remember thinking with people like, say, Katie Hopkins, there is that thing of, how much of this shit does she really believe, and how much of this is she just? It's just like hitting the button to get attention, kind of like Julie Burchill, who there's this kind of thing of, can you it's just like she obviously craves attention. I remember the first time shit blew up about her, which was when she was that stupid shit about not letting her kids play with poor children, or children children whose parents had named them after countries. Isn't one of your kids called India, Katie?
Yeah, right. I do think with regards to her specifically, it is a case of whatever brings attention. She will just say whatever's inflammatory or whatever. I think she even said at one point, she was asked in an interview, like, so if the needle turned towards like the left culturally, would you say different things? Would you change your rhetoric? And she said, oh yes, oh absolutely yes. I don't think there's any foundation though. I don't think there's any sincerity. At all.
I'm never sure what's worse, people who just genuinely believe awful, hateful shit, and people who just cynically say shit they know isn't true and that they know
in order to manipulate people.
Or just because there's money in it.
I struggle. I don't know what's worse. I would always err towards the sincerity. Even as awful as it can be, I think I would err towards the person who was genuinely awful. Because at least you can sort of see you can see what they are and just condemn them. You could just reject them, right? But this cynical lack of any kind of belief structure, any kind of morality.
Well, I often used to see it with, I often used to see right-wing, columnists, people like Little John or Melanie Phillips, whatever, and I think they can't. I can see the gaps in the logic here. They're blindingly obvious to me, and I don't consider myself to be like some, monster brain or anything like that. So they can't. How if they were were thick enough to believe this, they wouldn't be able to write a column arguing this as eloquently as they have, which is maybe
Yes,
a bit of a
exactly
naive
that.
thing about me, of assuming that, sort of like intelligent people can't believe incredibly stupid or
Yeah,
insane shit.
insane things. But it's the inconsistency too, isn't it? I mean, I always
Mm.
look at, like, as a more recent example, figures like Jordan Peterson. Now,
Mm.
I remember when someone recommended, and this was someone, ostensibly an ally on the left, who recommended Peterson to me. He said, "Oh, you've got to listen to this guy. He's making waves at the moment." So, okay, fine. So I listened to one of his seminars, one of his lectures, and in the first 15 minutes, my reaction was, this guy is a grifter. This guy's talking absolute nonsense, and he's doing it deliberately. The reason I thought that is because he deliberately misrepresents certain ideas and certain concepts. So within the first 15 minutes, he conflated Marxism with feminism, and Marxism and feminism with postmodernism. He'd used those terms as though they were interchangeable. And I was like, hang on. I know what those terms mean. I know the schools from which they derive, yeah? I
Yeah.
they are not synonyms for one another. The way he's using them, the way he's throwing them around with that degree of authority and self-assurance, what he's doing is a kind of dog whistle thing.
Yeah.
He's trying to pepper his speech with certain words that make it sound authoritative, that make it give it the patina of academia and intellectualism, which actually don't mean anything. It's what cult leaders do. It's what people who are trying to program you do. You know,
Yeah.
it's flim flam. It's a kind of ideological flim flam. And from that moment on, I was like, this is bullshit. And everything he's done and said since is like, yeah, man is talking absolute rot. And it's like he's chancing sometimes. It is like he's seeing, if will my audience, will the people who are listening to this actually go up and read further, or can I get away with saying this? And I'm like,
Yeah, that we're more like lobsters or whatever, or whatever.
it's insane. It's insane. He
It's like
says
that
things
Brass
like,
Eye thing where Dr. Fox was saying, that paedophiles have got more genetically in common
"Oh,
with
so
tramps.
yeah, brass eyes, so good, so good."
I've
Hate
never quite recovered from
the-
hearing someone describe Jordan Peterson as incel Kermit.
yes, that's about right. That's about right. I mean, the thing is, I mean, Peterson is particularly dangerous, I think, because he does come off as credible if you haven't done the further reading.
Yeah.
So if you didn't know what postmodernism is, if you haven't read Marx, if you haven't read, the feminists, you might be forgiven for being taken in by the flim flam. But the moment you have, there's no excuse. There's absolutely no excuse. He says things like, one of his more common, like, rote phrases. He says things like, Marx doesn't take into account the formulation of hierarchies in culture and society. It's like first 6 pages of most translations of the manifesto. First 6 pages, Peterson. He does exactly that. He explores directly how hierarchies form, how they historically formed, what influences them, how they change. And it's like, you are chancing. You are such a chancing grifter. You shouldn't be at the table. You know?
It's like, just give him a little one of the little plastic driver's wheels, and let the other people, like the natural philosophers, talk, kind of.
It is amazing. It's amazing to me. But what is particularly amazing to me is that people will still invite him to the table. And that's true of a lot of, like, again, you said this earlier, right? The right are held to such low standards.
Yes.
Such low standards in every arena of discourse. Whereas the left, if anyone on the left had made even an iota of the statements that Peterson had, that'd be it for them. Their
Well,
careers.
you remember the shit that Diane Abbott got for drinking a mojito on the tube,
Right.
I suppose, all the time that she forgot some figures and stuff, and all of a sudden that was proof that she was a moron and blah blah. And she only got anywhere because she's black, or a blah 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 blah. Whereas Boris Johnson or any of the other crowd could just get away with it. But it's going back to. I mean, I still remember going back to the was it 2000? Yeah, the London bombings in 2005.
Yeah.
And I mean, our own security services had been saying, that participating in the invasion of Iraq basically made a major terrorist attack.
Inevitable.
Inevitable. Yeah. So that's that's not exactly the voice of a raging commie subversive there.
Oh.
But one of the few people who was caught, well, as I say, right-wing politics, like centrist politics, is there a difference anyway? So much of it is geared towards denying the evidence of your own eyes. So the only person MP I think who drew a link was George Galloway, and I do remember there was I think it was not exactly your best poster child for anything really, but it was like a Newsnight special about this, after the bombings, and Gavin Esler was presenting it, and they got on Jose Maria Aznar. He was the Spanish premier, or had been the Spanish premier, and the guy looked like he'd been shot up with horse tranquilizer, quite frankly. I mean, okay, English is not his first language, but it was one of those things where Esler is basically feeding him questions, leading questions, and just letting him go on. So you do think that the invasion of Iraq? No, I don't think so, because these people, they do these things because they are terrorists and because they are bad people. I'm paraphrasing, but it was that.
Yeah.
Then on came George Galloway, and the difference. So you've said that our citizens have paid the price of our government bond. Do you not think that's an offensive thing to say? Why aren't you? Why are you doing this instead of shouldn't you be attending to the needs of your constituents? And stuff like that?
Yep.
He kept cutting in on him, and he kept throwing him stuff. None of it about nothing substantive, nothing about the content of what he was saying. All different ways to try and cut him off and try and make him look bad. And it's not easy. It's not hard to make George Galloway look bad. I know.
No.
But right. And of course to goad him and piss him off. I mean, one of the things about Corbyn was he could just take an awful. I mean, the one time I saw him stab at an interviewer was Krishnan Gurumurthy that time, one of his first interviews. But after that, he was very, very good at taking a level of pressure and scrutiny that certainly Boris Johnson did not.
My God, no! I mean,
didn't handle a fraction of.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think one of my only big criticisms of Corbyn is I wanted him to be nastier.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes I wanted him to be unpleasant. They gave him enough ammunition.
I think the thing was he genuinely he genuinely just underestimated what complete bastards his opponents were.
Absolutely, and overestimate. And I'm sorry, but he overestimated the intelligence of the British public. That's also the truth.
Yeah, well, and that's not hard to do, I often think. No. But I mean, again, I think the thing. I mean, of course, the biggest underestimation he made was the enemies he had in the Labour Party itself.
Yes.
The people who would always extol the virtues of pragmatism and compromise, and yet when who had one of their preferred candidates won the leadership election, would have been like, all right, you snivelling lefties, shut up. There was a fair democratic vote. We've got to now focus on getting the Tories out. But it was all a different story when, and most of these people are now more or less openly boasting about, yes, we did everything we could to
undermine
the party winning. While at the same time, of course, centrists will insist that that's not true at all, and you Corbyn cultists just can't. I swear to God.
Just can't take that you lost. It's not about that. It's not about that. This is not a cult of personality, by the way. The only reason we like
Starmer,
right. It's amazing, isn't it? Because they will lie through their teeth about him and for him. Oh, he didn't say that. Yes, he did. It's on video. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Oh, he's playing 4-dimensional chess. Oh, he's going to turn it around. No, he isn't. He's shown you who he is.
Yeah, it's like he lied to all the lefties about his pledges. He lied to the membership. But he wasn't. Of course, he's telling me the truth when he says he's going to. But he's not going to. He's going to scratch you. I mean, fucking.
It's asinine, isn't it? It's asinine. At this point,
I vowed I was going to vote Labour. I was going to because because despite what's happened, it's like I'm going to have the courage of my convictions, because I was saying, people, if you want to get the Tories out, you have to. The only realistic thing to do in this shitty political system we've got is to vote for the Labour Party, and even a bad Labour government is better than a Tory one. which I was called an ideologue by various centrists. But as soon as, I was determined to kind of stick to my guns and practice what I preached, even with Starmer. But it became increasingly clear. It's like I'm not.
Yeah.
He's really, really. It's almost like he's determined to stop me doing so.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was kind of like, I'm not going to vote for this.
Yeah. Likewise. And I know a lot of people who have been like really, hardcore Labour, good Labour people who've been trying to reform the party from within, but who said, no, this is it.
It's quite clear that we're not going to be allowed to vote a left-wing government into power, at least not with the Labour Party. They will actually, the Labour Party will actually fight tooth and nail and will torpedo its own electoral prospects, because ultimately they'll still be, those MPs will still be able to ride the gravy train, and they'll still be. And it's like the thing. What so with so many centrists is this thing again. It's this thing of yes, we want change as long as it doesn't inconvenience me personally, as long as I don't have to pay more tax or anything or anything, and as long of course as we don't actually make real changes that carry with them the risk of stuff going wrong.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And
it's appalling. And of course that almost always shunts them into the purview of the right. Always. They will ultimately always move further right. And historically, that's always what's happened. That's always what's happened.
The compromise, they're big on compromise as long as it's, but not with the left. They will never compromise with the left. They will always compromise. They will fellate the right. I mean, like, look at this fucking crap. Look at this fucking riots. All this crap about listening to legitimate concerns about
legitimate concerns, but right off.
Legitimate concerns about immigration. Just say it, racists.
Racists.
That's what it is. Racists. Listening to legitimate concerns about immigration, pandering to racists. That's what it is. Nothing else.
That's what it is. And not only racists, but fucking entitled children who throw temper tantrums over imaginary problems in their heads. Violent temper tantrums.
The right always has. I mean, I can't remember where who said this, but it's absolutely true. The left is engaged. The left is engaged in trying to coming up with, often wrong, solutions to real problems. The right is engaged in coming up with solutions to imaginary problems. Because you've got to. I mean, I did a thing once where I had a look at centrist parties in Germany, and of course. Into war Germany. Now, of course, even the the SPD, the Social Democrat Party in Germany, who because of course the real far left in interwar Germany were really far left. They were people who wanted Germany to become like the Soviet Union. Sort of the SPD were probably more like Corbyn. So the Centre Party was. The centrists are probably considerably to the right, but looking at all the centrist parties, I looked at all the major centrist parties, with one exception, which split in half on one, which split into its left and right wings basically, and the left went left and the right. All of them ended up going right, or joining the Nazis, or enabling the Nazis. Every single fucking one.
Because it's what they do. It's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? That's it. When they, centrists, they are almost universally, they're embarrassed right-wingers, aren't they? They want the plaudits to be, I'm socially liberal. I'm so liberal. Oh, I've got no problem with gay people or whatever. But the minute when push comes to shove, when it comes to crunch time, they always veer to the right. Always. Yeah,
but
it's filthy.
I'd rather be a liberal, in many respects. When it comes to things like freedom of speech, and I don't incline towards certainty. I think doubt is an important virtue. I don't like the way that lots of voices on the left are seem to be against freedom of speech and artistic expression. But at the same time, I do not want to be in bed with the kind of pricks that these people are crawling into bed with, because every goddamn one of them. And the interesting thing about people who hate trans people, almost without exception, they fucking love Israel and they are all fucking protesters.
Almost it's so interesting, that Venn diagram, isn't it? Almost universally, right? Isn't it? Isn't it just?
Yeah.
Well, Simon, on that note, thank you so much. This has been great. It's been, as always, it's been lovely chatting to you.
Yeah, I hope it's some help, because, as I say, this book has it's not been published. I don't know when or if it will be published. It hasn't gone to a publisher yet. It hasn't even gone to my agent yet. I'm still at the stage of getting feedback from beta readers like yourself. So it's a weird one to talk about.
Yeah, because you have to be careful, don't you? You don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah. And it always feels like you're tempting fate to talk about this great new novel. This great novel. I had so much fun writing. It's almost like you're basically saying it's consigned us to the depths of obscurity now. Fuck.
I hope not, because it's an interesting story. It's not one that crops up very often. You don't often see that many stories about gay guys from this era, in these circumstances. So it's really lovely to see. I really hope it does well.
Well, thank you. I do as well. Obviously, as I say, it's I'm obviously hoping to get once you've finished it, you let me know any thoughts you have, and hopefully
absolutely,
I'll chasing my other beta readers, and then I can inflict it on my agent and hear her groans of horror.
Brilliant. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to pimp out?
Well, there is, of course, my alter ego, Daniel Church. My ongoing identity crisis has had his second novel, The Ravening, published, which is also kind of a queer love story. This one between two women. The main character is a bi woman, and quite aggressive and spiky because of a trauma that we see happening in the first couple of chapters when she's 15, which makes her very, very pissed off, with sort of abandonment issues, intimacy issues, rage issues, more rage issues, and then essentially she started a new relationship with another woman, and then she discovers that her dickhead ex has managed to get her pregnant, despite it's implied that he may have stealthed her effectively.
Right.
But before she can have an abortion, which is what she's kidnapped, and he's quite determined to make her have his child. But there's a particular reason why he wants that, and why he's not the only person who's invested in that. There are other people who are also invested in this, and who are rivals to him, and it all links back to the trauma which had happened when she was 15, which is basically her and her mother their car broke down in the middle of the woods. Her mother got out to try and fix it, and there was a terrible scream, and her mother vanished and was never seen again. And she's fairly sure that she felt something there, something that wasn't human. So there is a supernatural element to it. There is a kind of psychological thriller element to it, but there is kind of a love story running through it as well. I'm very. It's been a bit of a Marmite book, I think, for as far as readers and reviewers are concerned. Some people really love it, some people hate it, and some people have very mixed feelings about it. I really should do better at selling my own work here, but I don't know. I'm very proud of it. I hope other people will be as well. I've got to do some rewrites on the third Daniel Church book, which will Sound of the Dark, which will be coming out next year. So I'm a busy bee at the moment.
Excellent. Well, I'll put links down below, by the way, guys, to your Amazon author page and to your website as well, or wherever you're available. Yeah. As for myself, guys, same as usual. You can find me knocking about here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel. I'm currently doing the remake of Silent Hill 2, which is very, very cool. I'm enjoying that a lot, I've got to say. Links to all of my published fiction over at strangeplaygrounds.com, or if you go over to Amazon and type in George Daniel Lee, you'll find my Amazon author page. If you go over to Arrow Films, you will find the Hellraiser UHD set, The Quartet of Torment, and myself and Kit Power on it. We're actually on the Hellbound disc. We are on the featurette, Hell is What They Wanted. It's an hour and 48-minute chat about Hellraiser and Clive Barker and horror and all the good stuff. All the good stuff. And we are very proud of it. We're very, very proud of it. And the guy who filmed it, Jonathan Zarin, made us look great. He's a very good filmmaker, and he made us look really good. So we were a bit surprised actually when we saw it. We were sort of like, "Oh, we're handsome! Wow, this is great! This is awesome!" You know?
Yeah, I usually look a bit of a lump on camera. So yeah, I'll be very glad of anyone who could achieve that for me.
I'll put you in touch with Jonathan. I'm telling you, he's very good. He's very good at what he does. And also, if you go over to Ginger Nuts of Horror, I am currently continuing with the My Life in Horror series of non-fiction articles, which I inherited from Kit. And that is a deep dive into media that has had a profound influence on our lives at some point or another. Loads of that coming up, by the way. Absolutely loads of it waiting to be published. So I'm very pleased about that one. Simon, again, thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me back on.
Pleasure. Anytime. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh,